first topic in this module is institutional change. And here I want to provide a framework for analyzing China's economic reforms. Douglas North defined institutions as the rules of the game in a society, humanly devised constraints that shape human interaction. And here he had in mind that the world is not just one open free market, that there are many other environmental factors that shape the way in which we interact with others and that impact the economic activity and performance of an economy. Now, North distinguished between formal and informal institutions, where formal institutions refer to political, economic, legal institutions and constitutions, laws, regulations that constrain the types of activities and interactions that can occur. There are also informal institutions in every society, and these are social norms, the level of social trust, the religious values of people that may affect how family members take care of each other, etc. These are also very important in thinking about how people are able to function and interact in an economy. Now, if we think about institutions as a tool for analysis, one real important aspect of Douglas North's contribution was that he kind of put institutions at the center and said, to think about what's happening in the economy, we really have to understand the nature of the institutions and how they are changing, because those changes then affect changes in economic activity and economic performance. And so using institutions as a lens, we can better understand the history of economic performance in different countries. We can think more clearly about the political economy of economic transition. We can understand better why growth comes from different sources, and we can understand the consequences of reform for different groups in society. Now, economists tend to put main focus on the market as an institution. There have been many important thinkers who have described very eloquently how the market provides an invisible hand that creates very efficient production, coordinating the decisions of millions, thousands of producers and consumers into an efficient outcome. There, of course, also are people who have come up with different frameworks that challenge this idea that free markets accomplish everything in an economy. So whereas Adam Smith and Frederick Hayek described the efficiency of the market, other people like Ronald Coase pointed out that in certain types of interactions, the transaction cost may be too high for the market to be the most efficient type of organization. For example, a firm, if we think about a firm, internally we have levels of managers and workers who kind of listen to the people above them. It's like a little planned economy, actually. And so in this context, it may not always be that markets are most efficient. Now, there has been a neoclassical school of economics that is associated with Milton Friedman and economists at Chicago, which have stressed the importance of the free market as the key tool for guiding economic development. But others who have studied the experience of developing countries have noticed that there are certain economic and social political institutions that often really prevent markets from being powerful agents of change. And so we need to understand those and address those institutions. For example, landlord-peasant relations, these feudal types of structures in many developing countries, if we are going to think about how to change and develop those economies. Now, more recently, there's a Washington consensus of thinking again about the role of government as mainly being to get prices right, support markets, and the government can provide kind of supporting efforts to make markets more effective. But if we think about the ideas of Douglas North and the growth and development experiences of East Asian economies and China's economy, these countries really pursued approaches where the government played a much more active role. in guiding economic output. And so again, question this orthodoxy of the market. Now, if we think about the elements of institutional change that affect economic growth or the efficient allocation of resources in the economy, we can think of several important concepts. The first is this idea of transaction costs, which I just described. And there's an idea that efficient institutions should survive and inefficient institutions should die because they can't compete with the efficient institutions. However, we know that when we look around the world, we actually still see many inefficient institutions. And why do they persist? Well, most likely it's because there are certain interest groups in a society that benefit selfishly from certain types of economic institutions, and those people, if they're politically influential, are going to oppose change. So people can only affect change in institutions through their own interests, and this can lead to suboptimal outcomes for the economy. Now, what does determine institutional change? We know that history now becomes important because the choices available at any one point in time are going to be constrained by the current nature of institutions and political strength of different groups in society. We also know that changes in one set of institutions can lead to incentives for changes in other institutions because they affect kind of the payoffs, benefits, and costs of those changes. We also know that most actors or interest groups who are thinking about trying to affect change in institutions are going to be making decisions based on the incentives that they perceive in a world of imperfect information, of a lot of uncertainty. And if we think about how institutional change can provide a framework for economic reform in China, we see all of these elements at work. That China's path of economic reform was really defined in many ways by the starting point, the nature of socialist institutions that created a clear path dependency, and that as reforms occurred in one part of the economy, it created pressures that ultimately led to other changes and reforms in other parts of the economy. We also, as we think about the path of economic reform in China, need to think about the incentives and information available to different groups in Chinese society, whether it be farmers, whether it be entrepreneurs, or whether it be government officials at various levels. What were the incentives and pressure that guided the choices that ultimately led to economic reforms in China?